Coming up on Network Africa. The World Health Organization declares Guinea Ebola-free 2 years after the epidemic began in the country. About 20 soldiers arrested in Burkina Faso for plotting to free the leader of September's coup, General Gilbert Diendéré. Burundi's peace talks begins as government and opposition meet in the capital, Bujumbura. This is Network Africa. Hello and welcome to Network Africa. I am Adeshewa Josh. It's a day many Guineans have been waiting for. Today, the World Health Organization declared Guinea Ebola-free 2 years after the epidemic began. Guineans are expected to celebrate the landmark victory and with concerts and fireworks. The disease killed more than 2,500 people in the West African state and a further 9,000 in neighboring Sierra Leone and Liberia. In a statement, the WHO congratulated the Guinean government and people for showing extraordinary leadership in the fight against the epidemic. But it also noted that there had been 10 new small outbreaks of the virus between March and November.
The World Health Organization has declared Guinea free of Ebola 2 years after the epidemic began in the country, leaving Liberia as the only country still awaiting a countdown for the end of the epidemic. According to the figures released by WHO, there were more than 3,800 Ebola cases in Guinea, out of more than 28,600 cases globally, with 11,300 deaths. Almost all the cases and deaths were in Guinea and its neighbors, Liberia and Sierra Leone.
Today is an incredibly important milestone for the huge effort that's been ongoing for nearly 2 years to stop the Ebola crisis in West Africa. As of today, for the first time in 2 years, we can say that all three countries have stopped the original chains of transmission which had led to such, which were driving this crisis and had led to such international and national alarm last year.
A country is declared Ebola-free 42 days after the recovery or death of the final patient, and if there are no infections.
We have to be very clear that although today is an important milestone, it's only a milestone. It is not the end of the Ebola response in West Africa. Because what we've learned is while we've stopped the original chains of transmission, we're also seeing small flares, 1 or 2, 3 cases occurring. We've had 10 events like this where the virus is reintroduced from the survivor population.
Liberia has lost more than 4,800 people to the hemorrhagic fever. But if all goes well, we'll be declared virus-free in January. The country was declared Ebola-free in May and September, but each time, new cases emerged. Sierra Leone officially ended its epidemic in November. Local health workers echoed a warning from the WHO that vigilance is still vital despite the mood of celebration. Guineans are expected to celebrate the landmark with concerts and fireworks.
Now let's bring in Dr. Axel Rund. She is the emergency coordinator at the Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF. She joins me from the operational center in Brussels. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa.
Welcome.
Well, it's a day that many have looked forward to, including Guineans and many people around the world, an Ebola-free status for a country where it all started from. Your organization, to say the least, has been on ground working closely with patients, victims, and of course, health workers. I mean, what did we eventually get right?
I think with the action we have done that since the beginning. We bring a lot of people on board. We had a huge amount of staff dedicated for for the outbreak, we bring international staff, and we also work with a huge amount of national Guinean staff and also in the other country. And without their help, we would never have reached this milestone today.
Absolutely a milestone. Well, this feat is also coming with a lot of prize on your side, talking about the death of your staff. Are you certain of a sustainable process in place so Ebola is kept at bay in Guinea and, of course, in Liberia and Sierra Leone?
As it was already mentioned earlier, it's true that it's a milestone. We still have to be really careful for the next 90 days and be sure that if any new case occur, we will be able to find it, to treat it, and to isolate it from new case. And yes, we hope now the countries that were already affected, they will be more vigilant, and if some new case will happen, they will be able to manage them quite fast.
What will be your recommendations for the Guinean government, especially the health agencies?
One of the main points will be to strengthen the health structure, because during the epidemic, a lot of them had to close or the staff died. And now I think those health structures should strengthen their capacities. I think it's also important to take care of the survivors. Some of them still have some psychological problem or some medical problem, and then it's important to be sure that we can provide them access to healthcare and maybe free healthcare.
Well, thank you so much. Like I mentioned earlier, your organization lost some of your staff in the fight against this epidemic, and I know that today must mean something significant in your fight against the epidemic.
Yes, that's right. We in Guinea they had 115 staff died, and it was 3 among our staff who died. And yes, I would like this day it's also to remind them and the work that they have done to fight this epidemic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Axel Rund, the emergency coordinator at Medicine Sans Frontières, speaking to us there from Brussels. Thank you so much. Now, let's bring it home now and talk about some of the sustainable factors that could help Guinea sustain this landmark victory. I'm being joined in the studio by Rotimi Sankore. He's the editor-in-chief of Africa Development. He's worked and done a lot of work about this whole Ebola breakout across those states in Africa. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you, Sharon.
Well, I mean, it's a carefully celebrated victory of some sort, you know, the way a lot of people have, described today. WHO is still saying that more vigilance is being put in place in Liberia, Syria, and of course Guinea, where it all started from. This definitely screams that the factors that, were not in place, or should I say were in place, that made the whole epidemic a huge one in Africa could probably still be there.
Oh, yes. Quite sadly, the factors are still very much in place. First of all, let's not forget how it started in Guinea. Mm-hmm. The interface between humans and animals was too close in the rural area, and the eating of what we call bushmeat here, bats and so forth. This is how it all started in a village in Guinea. Those factors are still very much there. So the interface between humans and animals can lead to a breakout at any time, because we are not yet sufficiently at the level of development where we can break that link in the rural area. So that's one issue to deal with. In terms of human-to-human transmission, which is what we are beginning to see the end of now. In Sierra Leone, it ended on the 7th of November. In Guinea, on the 28th, we are celebrating now. In Liberia, the new outbreak of 3 cases will end on the 14th of January 2016, if everything goes well. But that human-to-human transmission, many of the factors are still very much there. Water, sanitation, hygiene, and even if we overcome that, human resources for health, shortage of health workers, still very much there. the things that we have learned in the middle of an outbreak, surveillance, contact tracing, safe burials, there is no doubt there's been a huge improvement there. But we're in a new era now, in which and the issues we have to deal with, we haven't been doing so well on in Africa. Now we have new issues to deal with.
Which are?
What happens to Ebola survivors?
Like you mentioned.
Yes, so now we know that the virus is still there in the eyes of some people. We know that it can be found in semen for 60 to 90 days after you have been declared Ebola-free. And as HIV has shown us in Africa, these are areas which we have not done very well, because now we have to deal with issues of gender inequality, issues of sexual violence, issues of safe sex, inequality in society,
right.
issues like child marriage and so forth like that,
right.
where young girls, girl children are unable to.
I mean, these are factors that you can see across, these communities and even around the world.
Yes.
I agree with you. So now let's find a way forward. What should communities do, not just the government, in Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and of course across Africa? How do we stay Ebola-free and, make sure that this kind of epidemic, we don't experience it anymore?
I think government has arguably the biggest role to play, because obviously a lot of the issues are more within control of the government. Guinea, where it started, and where it would have ended if not for the small outbreak in Liberia, for instance, has the lowest literacy in the world, 25%. So obviously that's an issue. We were discussing the other time about the Ebola response team that went to the rural areas in Guinea and were attacked because people didn't understand what these fellows wearing all these suits were doing. So we have literacy issues to deal with. Now, it means literacy has a big role to play in public health. Not surprisingly, Nigeria was much better
because our literacy
is much higher
than the rest of those countries.
Over 51%. But also Ebola entered through Lagos, where the literacy is higher than the average, landed in a hospital where the doctors were quite up to the task and courageous enough to put their lives on the line. So literacy public health, water, sanitation, and now issues around gender inequality, sexual violence, and so forth. So it's quite complicated, but government has a lead role to play, and then public education can then kick in.
Mr. Rotimi Sankore, thank you so much. Editor-in-Chief, Africa Development Information. Thank you for speaking to us on Network Africa. Let's take a short break. When we come back, 30 presidential candidates, 1 woman, 3 Muslims, 3 ex-premiers, and 3 sons of former presidents. Central African Republic looks set to choose its new leader. After the break, I'll be speaking to a one-time presidential candidate. Stay with us. We'll be right back.